Everybody, it's great to see all of you, all of your faces, or at least your names if you can't be on screen or don't want to be. We did have one slight change in our plan today. Unfortunately, Kamal had a family emergency occur that involved a fairly long international flight on his part at very short notice, and so he just wasn't able to make it. He was deeply regretful of the fact, and he has a really interesting story to tell. So I'm very confident that at some point we're going to work him into a meetup later on, so you can all get to see his work and get to hear his story. But for now, I wanted to mention specifically the meetup today wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for one of our members just mentioning this museum to us, because the board, none of us knew about it. So this is one of these things. We had a member who had heard of the place and had a friend who had visited it. He told us about it, and then we did the legwork. We made, we reached out, we made the contacts, and thankfully we found a very enthusiastic and receptive partner on the other end that was eager to talk with us and work with us and help us put this presentation together. And it's my honor to introduce her to you now. She's a historian, an author, and curator of exhibits at the Glasgow Riverside Museum. So if you could all please welcome Emily Malcolm.
Thanks so much. Thanks very much, Michael. And I do think this should be one of the legacies of the awful pandemic that we've all suffered through, is that we now don't think anything about meeting like this and presenting like this and sharing information. And it feels a little bit like going back to 2020, 2021, but I think it's one of the things that we should retain and cherish, that we have found new ways of keeping in touch. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And I'll just get started. If there's anybody has any problems with not seeing things properly, can you let Samantha, I think, know in the first instance? So I've introduced myself. I'm Emily Malcolm, one of the Transport and Technology Curators for Glasgow Museums, which operates 9 museums across the city of Glasgow. And it's a real privilege to share a little introduction with you. And I'm always really interested in what people think about what they're seeing, and it's always more difficult when you're talking on Zoom. So I'm always really happy for you to use the reaction buttons on Zoom. So give me a little thumbs up or a smile if you like what I'm showing you. If you disagree, then feel free to do the same. It's just nice to know that you're not speaking into the void. So for this international audience, I thought I should start with a little geography lesson. And I hope you're familiar enough with the British Isles to ignore our neighbours to the south and the west. And we're not looking at England, Wales or Ireland here. We're looking at the little northern country of Scotland. And I know one of you has visited Scotland and is interested in fishing, but if anybody else has visited Scotland or has Scottish connections, then give me a little thumbs up if you can. So everything I'll be talking about today is centred on the River Clyde and the city of Glasgow. And they're both located on the west coast of Scotland, and the Clyde flows from the central belt. It flows west and enters the Atlantic Ocean. So across the pond, as they say, there you all are, and we're across on the edge of Europe. Here's a little graphic showing the River Clyde running from the east to west, from the right-hand side of the screen to the left. And it shows the 4 main conurbations on the river, Glasgow and Clydebank, Dumbarton, and then Port Glasgow and Greenock on the south bank. I want to give you an idea of how industrialised the Clyde area was historically. from the 1820s until the 1950s, the Clyde was a major centre for maritime trade and shipbuilding. We've got the four main conurbations, and then the black shaded areas indicate where the 67 shipbuilding sites or shipyards were located along its banks. And these 67 sites were actually occupied by over 250 individual shipbuilders throughout a 150-year period. So on an individual site, it would be occupied by a succession of different firms. The river is definitely post-industrial now. We just have 2 active shipyards on the river, and the upriver yard is situated at Govan on the south bank of the Clyde, and it is now operated by BAE Systems, the military naval shipbuilder. On the north bank, highlighted by another red circle, and on the site of one of the now defunct shipyards, you'll find Glasgow's Riverside Museum, an extraordinary shaped building, shaped like a corrugated wave, and it was designed by the late British Iraqi architect Zaha Hadid and opened in 2011, so just over a decade old. It's an absolutely wonderful museum in a fantastic location, and designed to be redolent of the Clyde's maritime past as much as it is an iconic building for the city. And that's very much reflected in the collections that are displayed inside. If you by chance visited, you'll know that our ship model collection showcases shipbuilding on the Clyde, and we've got models built at yards at every point in the river, from Rutherglen in the farthest east of the navigable part of the river, and then down as far south as the town of Ayr on the coast. We also showcase shipbuilding through time as well. We have models from the very late 18th century, models from every single decade of the 19th and 20th centuries, and then a single representation of the latter years of the industry from the 21st century. The collection comprises 700 models, and they range from the very, very simplest design models. Here's one here. It's an early river steamer called Caledonia, built in 1855. So just suggesting the shape of the hull and very little else, to the most complex display models from the late 19th century. This is an ocean liner named Umbria from 1883. There are so many ways to investigate this wonderful collection, and today I've really just got time to concentrate on one of them, and it's the one that I thought would be most relevant to you. So I'm going to be talking about the people that you're successors to, the model makers of the Clyde. Now, if you are ever involved with the press, I'm sure you're familiar with this photographic pose. The fake model maker called in at the last minute to artfully arrange your work and then pretend to be doing something. I know that we're often asked to do this in the museum, and it's usually the only point in the process when the model maker has a chance to take centre stage. I don't know if you agree with me, but I've found that model making is one of the most overlooked professions that I've come across professionally. Their work, your work, in interpreting, refining, developing and displaying concepts is critical to most industrial processes, past and present, and yet that role is almost always completely anonymous. I do know that this young chap here, photographed in the early 1970s, is called David McGilvery. That is really quite unusual that we have a name associated with a model maker. At the most basic standard, the output of the model maker is workmanlike and efficient, and at best it really becomes an art form in its own right, and one that should be celebrated. So it's a real focus of my work, and it's great to be able to share it with you. So one of the earliest model makers that we know a great deal about is this gentleman here, Alexander Stephen. He's one of the great Clyde shipbuilders and a model maker to boot. He was born in 1833 and he was active as a manager in his father's shipbuilding firm from the mid-1850s. He'd been trained in ship design from the age of 15, and as part of that he was encouraged to keep a diary of his work in the shipyard. So on the 25th of September 1848 he made an entry where he talked about foremasts and work on a ship called the Netta, but he also wrote and underlined that he'd commenced to make models, and that's the entry here. So commenced to make models, 25th of September, a Wednesday. Obviously something that was significant to him, a significant part of his training, and it remained important to him throughout his life. He went on to be the head of one of the foremost Clyde shipyards, but even in his late 50s, he was making the initial design models for his yard by himself. He had his own little workshop. He would often take the work home with him. He lived in what was basically a mansion house in a very fancy area of Glasgow, but he still retained that connection with his trade, with his tools, by having a little model workshop in his house. He continued writing his diaries, and this vessel here, the John Lidget of 1862, is one that he writes about. John Lidget was the first composite commercial vessel built, so that's a wooden hull on iron frames, and so it was poured over. The design was discussed in great detail by the client and their insurers at the beginning of 1861. Now, in his diary, Stephen records the dates and times that he worked on the model between the 5th and the 8th of February, but he had real trouble achieving a design with specified tonnage. So he worked further on the model between the 10th and 13th of February, and on these occasions noting that he finished at 11 p.m. and then at midnight. And I'm sure that kind of dedication is replicated in your work today. 2 days later, he took the train from Glasgow to London with this model in a crate and met at the offices of J&A Allen, who still didn't like the model. And he took it back to Glasgow and altered it once more and then sent it by post down to London, where it was approved. The shipyard won the contract to build the vessel, and it was completed in 1862. Now, we've got around 300 design models like this in our collection, and each one of them will have had a similar story of negotiation, trial and error before finalising. But in almost all cases, that story has been lost. So it's wonderful to have this little window into that history from Alexander Stevens. Another type of model we have is a plating model. This is again a plain half-hull design model, but overlaid with an inked plan of exactly how all the plates will be fitted onto the hull. This is a very large model of the Aquitania, a famous transatlantic liner which entered service in 1914. And it's almost 4 meters long, so really hard to photograph and to show you. So here's a little enlargement which shows how each plate had a grid reference, really, a number and a letter. And the plating model shows the thickness of each plate, how much it overlaps with the plate next to it, all the openings and portholes that had to be cut into the plate. So really a pattern that would be sent down to the shipbuilding areas and referred to make sure that the steel plates were cut to the correct size and fitted correctly. We're very, very lucky that we were able to locate a photograph of this model being made. There's a wonderful series of shipyard record photographs which are kept in the National Archives in Scotland, and this shows our model of Aquitania being made in the builder's ship model workshop. This was John Brown and Company, and the two model makers here they're not fulfilling the role that Alexander Steva did. They're not creating the design, but they're interpreting it in 3 dimensions. And in the photograph here, we see them using wooden templates to check and refine the shape of the model against the issued plans. And it's really wonderful to compare the shape of the model from this photograph against our model in the collection. And I wish we knew something about the 2 gentlemen in this photograph. It's a great shame that their names weren't recorded. I'd like to move on to another shipyard model making workshop, which is also reflected in our collections. This time it's the model making workshop of the Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company, photographed around 1912. And they've got more members of staff present here. There are 8 male workers here, and 4 main models that seem to be working on. So I presume that they're working in pairs or small groups on each of the models. They've got a very, very well equipped workshop, lots of lovely natural light. Also got gas lighting. You can see that the workshop's being used as a store for the half-hull models that we were looking at earlier. There they are, fixed to the walls. And they've got every piece of equipment that they could possibly need, from huge wood press here, which is used to create the base of the hull of these ship models. It's like a sandwich, a bread and butter sandwich of glue and layers of pine. And then very well equipped workbenches. Again, they look like they're in front of a window for lots of natural light. All of the models that are on the workshop floor are display models, not the design models, and this reflects the huge interest in industrial exhibitions in the 19th and 20th centuries. These had their origin in the Crystal Palace in London in 1851 with the Great Exhibition of the Industries of All Nations. And that was the first time that industrialists really saw the benefit of connecting with their public and advertising their products. Shipyards found it difficult initially to find something to display. Their raw materials weren't very interesting, and their finished product was so huge it could never fit in an exhibition hall, despite the size of the Crystal Palace. So they really came to concentrate on the ship model as the best way of conveying what their product would look like in miniature. So there's a huge range nationally and internationally in the UK, France, Russia, America, South America, Africa, in a way that I don't think we have nowadays. The industrial exhibitions were a way of providing the public with an insight into industry, and were hugely popular, and obviously worth the while of the shipbuilding companies to make quite a substantial investment to provide themselves with a suite of models to have available for show. Going back to this photograph of Fairfield's workshop, we were able to identify that this model here represented sister ships called Cairo and Heliopolis that were built around 1907, and for a Mediterranean service by the Egyptian Mail Steamship Company. And we were able to trace this lovely model through a piece of archive that came from Fairfields, and it's now in the care of our sister organisation, Glasgow City Archives. This is Fairfield's model book. It's had quite a hard life, but it records every model the yard made for their own use and where it was in the shipyard or where it had gone on loan for exhibition. So looking at the entry for Cairo and Heliopolis, it's here, and it's saying in April 1907 it was sent to Paris for exhibition at Bordeaux. And and we were able to trace that through to a lovely postcard of the Exposition Maritime de Bordeaux in 1907. And this really gives a perfect flavour of what those exhibitions look like inside. I mean, like today, different companies are buying space, they're setting up a stand, they're making it look as flash and lovely as they can. So you have a French company has a little tent here in the background, and then in front of that you have John Brown and Company, builders of Aquitania, Vickers, which is an English company from Barrow and Furness, and then in the foreground here you have, with this lovely arching sign, the Fairfield Shipbuilding and Engineering Company of Glasgow. And in the foreground we were lucky enough that the photographer has just caught that model, Cairo and Heliopolis, on display in France in 1907. Now, Michael said that I wasn't able to give you too much detail. So with that in mind, I thought I'd just show you the details of two of the very finest exhibition models that we have in the collection. And they were built for use in very, very high status exhibitions. This first one is a model of a Clyde paddle steamer called Columba, and she was designed as a passenger vessel but also as an excursion vessel, so for sightseeing and taking the air on a summer's day. So Columba was built in 1878, and in 1879 a model of Columba was sent to the Exposition Universelle in Paris, which was held in 1879. And this is the model that was sent by Jane G. Thompson. It is a model that is about 5 feet long, and it's superbly detailed, and I'll try and take you as close as I can to that lovely detail. This is showing the centre section of the vessel with the paddle boxes and the bridge, and there are two areas which will be of most interest. Here's the bridge from the other side of the model, and you can, oh, I'm getting a bit of feedback. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm getting a bit of over dubbing there. So there are two little areas. I'm having trouble with my presentation. Can I just take it down for a second and then put it up again?
Yeah, that's fine. Does everybody have their mute on, just to make sure she's not getting feedback back through somebody else's microphone or something?
Right, I'm so sorry. I think that was me. I'm back in action now. So we have the two areas I'd like to show you, and this is looking at the bridge of the model and a deck house which is 4 inches high, so very small, but superbly crafted. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. This is the lovely curved front of that deck house, and if you have a look, it's not made as a block. It's made as a little tiny piece of cabinetry with windows with glass, beading around all those little panelled features, pilasters dividing the windows, a door that's fitted, that's slightly curved and fitted in separately to the structure, with a door handle that's smaller than a peppercorn, and then even its own tiny little keyhole sitting there. So something that's the photography that we've been able to do over the past couple of years has really revealed a lot of this detail for us. As I said, the Columba was used for sightseeing, so sitting on deck and taking the air was very important. This is a lovely little feature of a seating area that was warmed by warm air coming from down below. And this seat, just to zoom in to let you see how finely that's made. Again, this is something that's about the height of the first joint of your thumb for these little benches. And they're not made out of a single piece of wood. They have actually been fabricated from tiny little wooden slats, sandwiched together and shaped, and with individually turned feet, each one of them, less than 1/4 of an inch in height. The models are surprisingly stable for such delicate workmanship, and using wood and animal glue. There's very, very little movement or fracturing. You can see a tiny little bit of damage just on the right-hand side of that enlarged image, where something has warped very, very slightly and split. But really, that's unusual in the models. I think that's a testament to the materials and the preparation of the materials made by those model makers. Again, there's some internal detailing in this model that you can just see. It's very, very hard to photograph. There's little window drapes have been put there, but then there's drawn internal paneling there. And Columba also had a ladies' cabin, which was screened from outside view. And again, that's suggested in the model with this lovely piece of painted opaque glass to suggest that. The two other areas I'd like to show you, one's forward in front of the promenade deck and one is aft. This is tucked away under the promenade deck, so something that's very, very hard to see if the model's on display. And it's a little drinking fountain. If it was a long, hot day, people could refresh themselves with a cup of water. I don't know if you have these in America, but they were public drinking fountains that had the drinking cups suspended underneath them. And that's here. A lovely little silvered detail with two hanging brass cups, and there it is there, 3 little taps, the 2 cups on chains, something that only 5% of people would even notice on the model, but beautifully rendered there. And again, right aft on the vessel, there's a beautiful bit of detailing. Again, this is less than the size of my pinky fingernail. A lovely little bit of carving of a sailing boat at the stern, and even within that, beautiful rendering of the sky with a bit of shading and a bit of shading on the sea. This is the second model, again built by John Brown and Company. Glen Sannox was a later paddle steamer built in 1892, and this one actually did cross that pond to America, and it was put on show at the Columbian exhibition in Chicago in 1893, and indeed was probably built for that exhibition, and was one of the medal winners from the Columbian exhibition in 1893. So zooming in to the paddle box of Glen Sannox, there's some absolutely stunning carving here. The little roundel there is less than an inch across. But has just wonderful carving showing a stag and then a hunting dog, which has detailed painting on this tiny little figure. And then Glen Sannox has some stunning internal detailing. Again, very difficult to photograph just getting in that close and getting the lighting in the right direction, but I can hope you can see in this photograph of the upper deck house and then descending into the main saloon, there's just a wonderful staircase here, and if I enlarge that, so wooden treads with a lovely bullnose edge, painted risers, and then these beautiful individually turned balusters descending into the main saloon. So again, at a scale of 1 to 48, these are coming out about an inch high for those tiny little balusters. It's really an exercise in finesse. Now, the Clyde has those models were made by shipyards for their own use, but the Clyde also supported a range of commercial model makers who would be able to build a model of anything, whether it was a crane or a ship or a patent model for someone developing a piece of machinery. And foremost among those was a company named Kelso and Company. They were founded in the 1880s by a man who'd started work as an optician, so someone who didn't have any connection with shipbuilding at all, but had skills at working at very detailed level. And in 1880, as well as advertising as an optician, he began to advertise that he could make ship models. And that side of his business increased incredibly over the next 20 years until he was employing about 80 people by 1900. This is one of his late 19th century adverts from the post office directory. So he's still advertising as a manufacturing optician, but the spectacles of his earlier advertisements have been replaced by one of his largest ship models that he'd made. This was a 14-foot long sectioned model of a cargo ship called Ruahine, and it was actually built for a naval training academy in England, and was fully sectioned, and every part of the vessel was fully operational, all rendered in brass. And it was actually written about in the press at the time that the model had taken longer to build than the actual ship had been. I wanted to share with you two wonderful photographs that we have of the inside of their workshop. This is quite unusual for the internal workings of a business to be recorded, and it's just a fascinating image. The photographer has stood, it's almost like he stood in one place in the workshop and taken a photograph looking eastwards, and then turned his equipment round and looked westwards. So this is the westward looking angle, as far as I can tell. And it really shows, I don't know what your workplaces are like. I think I caught a glimpse of somebody's when we were setting up, but it's set up like a light factory. It's not like an intimate personal workshop. It is light engineering that's going on here. There are belt-driven lathes, and then there's a treadle-driven lathe in the foreground, a wide range of hand tools, and we have, I think I counted, there's about 15 people. There's 9 in the foreground, and then there's a whole other department that seems to be further in the background. So this is really reflective of that figure of employing almost 100 people in the late 19th century. The work that those gentlemen are probably doing in that photograph is the ship model fittings that Kelso advertised. If you see underneath the model, it says ship model fittings on 1/4 and 1/8 inch scale are always in stock or in progress. And that was, these were supplied to shipbuilders if they had their own wooden model making departments but wanted really fine metal components to complete them. And we have some of these in our collection. The little packages on the left are, on the right hand side, are little packages of miniature bottle screws that they've got an example of them tied onto the cord that surrounds them, and we've never unwrapped those because they came to us direct from the workshop, and presumably they contain a supply of the little fittings that are shown on the front. Kelso's supplied these tiny fittings, but also larger fittings like winches and capstans, But when they fitted them to their own models, they always supplied them fully wound with wire or cord to represent a rope. This is looking in the eastwards direction of the workshop. So if do you see what I mean? How I think he's just turned his camera around and photographed the other way. And again, you can see that stretching into the distance. But here people, the men are working, they're working more on components of ship models. You can see that in the background, there are two sets of workers working on a crane model and a ship model. I think it's the ship model that we saw in the first photograph. And then here in the foreground, there's a young man working on lifeboats. Now, Kelso's lifeboats were famous for their level of detail, a work of art within a work of art. And you can see here that there is a little lifeboat fully fashioned, and there's actually, you can see a tiny a thwart or oar sitting there in the one that's beside his hand. Here's an example of a Kelso lifeboat from our own collection. This is a model of a warship called HMS Argyll, which was launched in 1906, and Kelso made a beautiful model of this vessel. And here's one of the tenders here. And that's just a little detail showing how that's been completed. You know, many ship models, it's just the tenders and lifeboats are just solid blocks of wood shown with their canvas coverings on. But here we've not only got the seats or thwarts, we've got fully fashioned gratings in the bottom, and then all the oars and even the boat hooks shown, and not just placed in the vessel, but actually shown as they would be stored for going to sea. So really a wonderful, wonderful detail and a wonderful model. Again, here's just going into a bit of detail on a beautiful tug model from 1908. And this full photograph really lets you appreciate the quality of the paint finish on this little tug. She was called Flying Cormorant and served on the Clyde from 1908. Again, made by Kelso and Company and actually sent by them for exhibition on their own behalf. So here, just looking at the little engine house cover, this allowed access to the engines and allowed ventilation for that hot space. In this tiny area, which is the size of the palm of my hand, there are 108 separate metal fittings added to that tiny piece. So it adds up, if you extrapolate that over the length of the ship, it adds up to almost 1,000 tiny metal fittings added onto the model. Most models were painted in quite a kind of perfunctory way, you know, it just suggested of the superstructure. But here the doors have been painted as a sort of trompe-l'oeil effect to suggest that they're sitting open, which is quite charming. Another part of my research has been to try and talk to model makers. I think any historical activity that anyone is researching, you're never going to learn as much about it from books and papers and photographs as you would if you just spent an hour or two with the people that actually did it. And that goes for everything from hunting mammoths to ship model making in the past. So it was a huge privilege to be able to make contact with the maker of this ship model, who was an elderly gentleman when I met him, Mr. James McFadden. He was born in 1921 and began his apprenticeship during the Second World War as a pattern maker, and his skills were soon identified as being worthy of being elevated from the apprentice pattern makers, and he was taken out and put as an apprentice to the shipyard model maker, who was an elderly man in the 1940s. So his working life stretches back to probably late 19th century or the very early years of the 20th century. And Mr. McFadden was delighted that we had his model in our collection. I spent many afternoons in his home and him coming into the museum to talk about how he'd worked. And he's now passed away. You'll see he died in 2014. But he has left us a huge legacy of notes about his models, and then he was kind enough to draw some little diagrams of how he put models together, and the little tools that he made to enable him to scale up and down from plans. And it's speaking to him that really reveals the kind of the personal side of it. He said that he used to have this little scale model man that was used when talking to clients about scale, and it got broken and he'd been asked to repair it, so he made it look like a pirate with a peg leg instead of creating another figure. So just that kind of the kind of humor and personality that comes into everybody's day-to-day work. And then this is Kamal Ozturk, who we really wanted to be with us tonight. He's been such a help to me over the years. He is a multi-talented individual, but one of his pieces of work is as a model maker. That's much now reduced because there are only the 2 shipyards on the River Clyde, and he still has a contract for building for BAE Systems, but only when they complete a ship, which isn't every month or so as it used to be in the past. So this kind of ties up the exhibition side. Here's one of Kamal's models on display at a recent defence exhibition in Glasgow. But as Michael said, I really would recommend that you make contact with him at another date to find out more about his life and work in Glasgow. So just coming to the end of my presentation, a lot of these photographs were taken by my wonderful colleague Jim Dunn, who's a very highly skilled photographer, and used in our publication, one that we're really proud of, a full catalogue of our ship model collection, and fully illustrated. So every model we have has a photograph, and there is fruits of our research really into how models were made and used and then collected by the museum. So that's me coming to the end. Well, I should actually say that this book is available in America. I know it's available on Amazon if you want to purchase it, but I think there's other bookshops. There are other bookshops apart from Amazon, and I believe it is available in those as well. But if you have any interest in what I've been saying, and I don't personally benefit from it at all, but please have a look at our catalogue, and you'll be able to find out much more about the collections. You can also look at most of our models online. We have a collections navigator, and there are photographs of the models I've shown today, and then lots of other ones. So just thanks very much. Michael will be able to pass on my contact details if you've got any queries or want to discuss anything further. But I will end my presentation now, and I think I've run over, Michael, but hopefully we've still got time to carry on a discussion.
Oh, for sure. No, I don't think anybody was going to complain about a few extra slides. That was. Thank you so much. Everyone give a nice little quiet round of applause if you wouldn't mind. All right, well, I saw a couple of questions in the chat, so I may just call those out first. Let's see. First thing I think I saw was Terry was asking about the scale of the Columba paddle boat model. Do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
Yes, most of the models are made at a scale of 1 to 48. And that usually, for most of the 19th century, that gave you a model that was kind of feet, I think the idea was always that you could look at the model in one kind of glance. So the Columba model, that's 1:48. The Glensanix model, the second of those paddle steamers, that is a different scale. I think that's 1:32, and that's what made us think it had been built at an unusual scale, specifically for the Columban exhibition, and to allow them to get that level of internal detailing. But nowadays, there's very few ships built that that would work at scale of 1:8. So throughout the 20th century, the scale so it moved to being 1:96, and then I think it's 1:200 and 1:400 now, and that's moving kind of into metric. So 1:48 is the standard scale for most of our models.
Okay, and then I saw Paul Palanch had a question about the Glensanix model. He was wondering if all that gold detail on it was real gold leaf.
Yes, I believe that gold leaf is the only gold type decoration that doesn't tarnish over time, and certainly that. And so yes, gold leaf, and a lot of this silver bright work is actually silver plated as well. We don't do a lot of restoration work at Glasgow museums, but we do clean, and when the silver and brass metalwork on the models is cleaned, it's really quite stunning.
All right, and Terry has his hand up.
Yeah, so in Chicago, we have the Museum of Science and Industry, and they have a ship's gallery. And the building itself was part of the original Columbian Exposition in the late 1890s, I think 93. And there are quite a number of models. They revamped it a number of years ago. I did some models for that. And also, I don't know if Hal Chaffee is on with us today, but Hal did a number of pieces for the revamping. But there are some very old models from the exhibition. And brass, wood, and I'm just wondering, now that we're talking about this, how many of those may have come out of Glasgow?
Well, I mean, I am always really interested. I have a spreadsheet of almost 1,000 models that aren't in my collection that were made on the Clyde. And when my colleagues go on holiday, they send me photographs from Croatia and St. Petersburg and Durban of museums that they visited, and they find a Glasgow built model. So I would be really interested if I mean, I'm happy to follow that up myself. But if any of you know of any Glasgow built ships, Scottish built ships, I'd be very interested. And Kelso's as a company, they had a worldwide reach in their client base. They were building models for clients in Europe, Japan, Russia. Matthew Kelso, we know that he travelled to America on a number of occasions, so he must have been doing something with clients in the States. So yeah, no, that's very interesting. So were you doing restoration work, or were you modeling?
I was doing new models.
Okay.
1/4 inch scale intermodal port facility in LA, and also an 1882 Chesapeake oysterman that had been turned into a charter boat. But I know that they've got a warehouse full of not just ship models, but just models period for the whole museum. But my suspicion is that maybe some of those models that came over for the exhibition may have stayed in Chicago. So.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Raise your hand or just speak up. All right, well, I actually had a question or two. So I was curious, and you may have touched on this a little bit, but I was hoping maybe you could elaborate. So in the early days of these shops and these shipyards, were the model makers employed for that task early on, or did they kind of evolve out of like carpenters that were on hand that were told, hey, we need a small version of this. You already know how to do it, so just do it smaller. And was it kind of that to begin with?
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. The UK has wonderful census records that are available online, and on a 10-year, I presume you have similar in the United States. At a 10-year level, you can see people's names and their occupation. And I actually took anybody who had the occupation of model maker in 1890 and tried to trace them back 1860, and it's very few that, like Mr. McFadden, they began work as pattern makers and ships carpenters, joiners, and that's just within the shipyard. When you go to the commercial model makers, there's a huge variety of professions that end up model making. There's Matthew Glenn Kelsey, who started off as an optician. There was somebody who'd been a jeweler, people who'd been brass workers, and carpenters, joiners, cabinet makers. So it's, I don't know if that's similar with the people here today. Is a profession that you came to as part of a career progression, or something that you always worked at? Is that something that's replicated today?
It kind of depends.
That's my question to you.
Yeah, no, we do have some people who go through purpose-built programs to become model makers, though I'd say that's more exception than rule. A lot of us did come from other backgrounds. My training was in metalsmithing and jewelry design, and I ended up kind of falling into a position as a model maker. We've got people who started out as...
And then can I ask a question if
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And then can I ask, just of the group that's here today, are you involved in the design model making and prototype, or is it model making for display or for museums? What's the sort of range of angles that your model making takes?
Anyone want to jump in on that and talk about themselves for a minute?
I'll hop in. So no, I do a lot of transportation models, planes, trains, automobiles, trucks, and ships. But also we do prototype models, as well as design study models. An engineering group may decide, they may be working on an engine and they want to have something to hold in their hands of an engine block that they're working on for 20-cylinder diesel or something like that. So it runs a gamut. There are some model makers who specialize in architectural models. There's quite a lot of them. But yeah, we sometimes it's just grab whatever somebody calls and it sounds interesting, go into it. And then there's a lot of captured shops like Michael's at Garmin, Steelcase, and Herman Miller in Grand Rapids Furniture, and Bose. I think Nike used to be a member. So yeah, it really runs the gamut.
Dave has his hand up. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, regarding the, how you get into it and what you did, I think a lot of model makers will land on one or two clients that specialize in something, and that kind of drives their business in that direction. One of our clients early on was the Gas Research Institute, and that involved making things that were too large to put on display, large research facilities or equipment, and having to reduce it, to a size that was transportable, and then some type of communication that helped to explain what it was. That really dominated our business for about 15 years.
Thank you. That's so interesting. It's just, like I said, it's just fascinating to talk to people that are doing the same kind of work today, and just seeing if they feel any kind of similarity or connection with those people who did it decades or centuries before.
Oh, for sure. And I'll say right now, if you have any other questions about any of this stuff from a research standpoint, or you're just satisfying your own curiosity, I mean, you feel free to reach out. The APMM will be happy to, answer questions for you or put out surveys or anything like that. You've
Oh,
put on
that's
a
very
great
kind.
presentation
Thank
for us, so
you.
we could certainly do a little bit to
Mhm.
return the favor.
I mean, that's why it's been so interesting speaking to Kamal, because there are some things which are very similar to how I understand ship model making was done in the past, but then he builds his models in transverse sections rather than in horizontal sections, and he said he wouldn't consider building horizontally now, whereas that was completely standard, but then that's due to the materials that he's working in, plastics and resin rather than wood. So it's just getting a feel for that kind of the change of technology. And but then when he's talking about turning a small piece of metal for a balustrade, it's exactly the same. Small miniature lathe, a little bit of brass, turning away, and then he fits it. So it's really, that's what's so interesting, is kind of seeing what the comparators are.
I saw Bruce had his hand up, and then we'll go to Jim.
I was just going to mention that we saw lots of ship models at various scales when we toured the studio that made the Titanic movie. And they had some smaller ones. They did a lot of it with CGI, but they also had a 1/4 scale one of the bow of the stern section that was in a giant pool and could hydraulically tip up on its end. So they could get some good
Wow.
shots of that. And then they had a lot of 1-to-1 sets. So I could just see any of those people watching this and saying, yep, I was there working at all the scales you can work at to make all these Titanic models.
Yeah. I mean, that's another whole other side of it, isn't it? Kind of like dramatic film related modeling, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and props and film effects are definitely a chunk of it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, you had a question? Or
Emily, do your museum, besides the tours and so forth that you offer, do you offer any training? Do you offer any kind of help for people who might want to become model shipbuilders?
Well, there is a course at one of the Glasgow colleges. They run a professional model making course, and we have had students from that course coming to look at models. And then at another museum I worked at, they also did some modeling for us. That they would come and say, well, what would you like a model of? And we would say, oh, we'd love a model of this part of the shipyard, or this tank was a lovely one that was made. So yes, so it's still active. I do think a lot of them, their aspiration is to go into the film industry and be working on things like the Titanic. And I don't actually know what their career paths are once they leave, but I think it's quite a well-regarded course.
Yeah, our vice president of education, one of them is actually located in Bournemouth in the UK.
Ah, okay.
And he hosts a student model making competition for us every year. And we actually had some entries this year from the City University in Glasgow. So that's kind of
Wonderful.
nice tie in
Yes.
there. All right, did we have any other quick questions before we wrap up? Looks like we're good then. All right. Well, real quick. First off, I just want to say thank you again to Emily for this wonderful presentation. This truly was a feather in our cap of our Meetup program. So thank you very much for that. Everyone, if you enjoyed this at all, consider going and looking into that book. I already tooled around on it a little bit, what I saw online, and it's a beautiful catalog. So give that a shot, And yeah, I guess that's about everything. Sam, did you have any other
Yeah, I
points?
wanted to just remind everybody that we try to do these twice a month. And the next one is scheduled for the 25th of August, which is a Thursday, and we'll be meeting at 3 p.m. And I don't know if I should divulge the title yet, but I think it's going to be very interesting, sort of on financial matters of running a model shop. So I hope you all join us then. And thanks so much for participating today. And I will end the recording now.